Hello.
Hi everyone.
Hi Jonathan.
There we go. Sorry for the delay. I was having mic problems. Okay, so I never know how seriously people take Juneteenth, because I believe it's only been a public holiday for a couple of years. But we may be quite light today. We'll give it till 5 after probably. Yeah, Hannes also can't make it today, so it'll just be me. Do we have any requests for agenda hacking? I know, Dick, you were looking at, let me actually do this.
Yeah, Don, I think Hannes posted an agenda. I think he had 3 items.
Yeah, I've got I'm writing out the agenda on HedgeDoc. So the fixed items is to come back on the simple text for registration policies. I saw there was a bit of traffic on that on the list. It'd be worth looking at that. Although with lots of people out, it would be hard to make a decision. The main sort of new thing is to revisit the 117 hackathon aims, because initially we agreed, I think there was good agreement, that we would base the hackathon on interoperable registration policies because it's such a big open area of the spec, but we've made essentially no progress on anything interoperable there, and I honestly think it's a bit of a it's a bit of a time sink compared to making progress in other places. So I know Dick's got a use case from the healthcare industry that might be interesting. I saw, Ray, you've just posted some of the needs from the voting community, and I've got some stuff from the media CTPA side. So as a radical swerve, something we could discuss is whether we go use case based and actually try and prove the usefulness of the idea rather than try to get exquisitely technical with a sidebar. Yeah, I think it's time to get started. So yes, Ray, recognized your hand.
Yeah, thanks. No, I think we should talk about that registration policy, but in terms of the hackathon, I don't know, do you want to just talk about the agenda now, or should I just start talking about subject matter?
There are so few of us. I think let's just talk about the subject matter, and we can insert as we go.
Well, okay. So regarding this registration, let me just outline a few things, at least from my point of view. Number one, I was very much I didn't understand that the registration policy was the policy for submitting stuff into the log, and it seems that, like the key trends work, which is very, I have to say, a gleaming example of great work that they're doing to explain what they're doing there.
Yeah.
Is apparently allowing anybody to post into their key trends blog.
Yeah.
And so their registration policy is absolutely minimal, apparently, except for the fact that I'm not sure what kind of checking offhand that they do of the certificate, the public key that's submitted. They might do that. So, one way to handle this is just to say, to kind of opt for a very minimal description of registration policy, which is nothing except for just the absolute minimum checking of the submitter being, okay, well, there's going to, so here's how I look at it, is that there's going to be a user that is connected to the SCITT, log manager machine with a secure channel, and they're going to have a key that is in their machine, but it's not going to be, what we're going to need is to relate that to the authority to submit things for a product. And that was what I was relating to that we would need. It looks like almost a relationship, a map of here's people who are authorized to submit for this product and this. Now, and this entity that owns the product. So that's a very specific thing that is related to how, I'm looking at it for software and for, hardware products, or I think most of the things most of the use cases, and which is unlike the key trans thing where the users are actually submitting their own private key, and there's no need for this other relationship. All right, so I see other hands, so I'm going to stop talking.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll keep the hand order, but just to say my leaning would be to support that very minimal thing. Say you absolutely can strongly identify people and restrict their access to feeds. The end. Neil?
Well, just very, very briefly. Sorry, I just started coughing. I wouldn't want any sense in which the only people allowed to comment on a product are people who are, I don't know, in some sense officially associated with the product, or, seen by the product developers as legitimate and so on, because something that is, of course, very interesting to anyone who thinks there's a problem with a product is a skeptic who says it's broken. And there may be, reasons that the product owner wants to suppress that information. So, it's very tricky because, the main reason for a registration policy in my mind is to prevent spam. And spam, which simply overloads the system and makes the system break down. And I'm less worried about risks of it being untrue, because I think the relying parties are the only ones who can decide, what not a slant on truth, but like how they evaluate truth. We can look to follow on the example from the voting world. There was a monumental, important report released recently by a colleague of mine, Alex Halderman and Drew Springall, who criticized the Dominion equipment. It criticized really just some specific aspects of security vulnerabilities. And as we know, all equipment has security vulnerabilities because that's the nature of software that's complex. And, Dominion didn't want people to know about it, and the state of Georgia didn't want people to know about it. And it all get conflated with this brouhaha around, denying the outcome of the election. And the researchers were completely uninterested in that. They were interested in trying to preserve election systems. So we can't have a gatekeeping role for that. We need at least those administrators who do want to understand the security vulnerabilities of their systems to be able to get at it. So, just a long way to say, what we want is a system that's usable, that's not spammy in the sense of broken by denial of service, but we don't want to vet declarations. Now, maybe you can say a particular instance of SCITT is run by a particular organization, and if you trust that organization, then you're interested in what's on that SCITT. But I think that SCITT instance, and that just, devolves back to the larger question of which SCITT instances do you pay attention to, and how do we make it easy for people to find out about credible issues with products that the owners don't want to admit to yet.
Sure. So I've pre-written in the notes, so I will now clarify. I think it's a really good point that you and Ray, in the past, Roy also, have described these use cases very similarly as making claims about a product. And I am 1000% with you, Neil, that restricting who is allowed to make comments about a particular thing runs counter to the aims of SCITT and runs counter to the interests of a trusted community or a cyber secure community. But what we do with access controls and identification is actually limiting access to feeds, not to products. So I think the way that we get around this, and certainly this, well, I mean, I've implemented this for the DoD, so I'm sure it works to some degree, is that you have, you'll have a feed for the official software vendor, and only their authorized builders and CI/CD systems can say, yes, this is the correct latest version. But equally well, the transparency advocates, the the United Nations, the security researchers, they can all have feeds too, where they say, hey, we've spotted that this version of software with this hash is subject to whatever X problem. And people would go and believe them about that. So it depends what question you're asking. And I think that's an important thing that we're not very good at explaining in SCITT, is what strong benefit we get from having this feeds structure. And probably that's a note for us to tidy up some of the supporting pieces. But I'm 1000% with what you said on preventing spam, absolutely. But preventing people from making comment about stuff they're in a legitimate position to, absolutely not.
Yeah, and let me just follow up then, and it's really the last point that I brought up. Like, I think it will be useful to look at use cases and to raise the question of how does a relying party figure out which feeds to follow. So
yeah,
that I would love for us to get into that conversation.
Yeah, forgive me, I'm doing the leading and the things and the notes today, so I'll take short breaks between. Dick?
Thank you, John. Yes, I think the participation rate today is very low because of what's happening in the U.S. with the holiday. I'd like to suggest we, not try to reach any consensus today on the registration policies, just because there's so many other people that I think would want to contribute to this, and maybe we just want to jump into the use cases, and I'm happy to do that whenever you would like me to start. Thanks.
Fabulous. Thank you. I think that's a good idea. I mean, we might as well hear, because Henk and Cedric are in the queue, and Roy, there we go. So some of the most experienced folks on this topic are here. So let's hear it out. But I agree, making significant decisions on a day when a lot of people are out is we shouldn't do things like that. Cedric.
Yes, I wanted to comment on feeds, because I think we have different interpretation of what it means. And I think the current text in the architecture really sees the feed as just a way of separating between different purposes from the same issuer. So you have an issuer, and then you have the name of the issuer, and that's the main thing you should consider when using a transparent statement. And then that issuer selected a feed, which is the way for the issuer to say what's the subject of that statement. And so so that's a minimalistic definition. And the advantage of that is that there is no need a priori at the standard level to agree on the interpretation of the form of the feed between multiple issuers. In particular, if for a given feed that represents a product, there will be some statement made by the provider for that artifact, and they will be considered by everyone. And if I want to know about a particular artifact, I'm going to look for a statement for that artifact issued by the artifact vendor. And if someone else issues a statement for the same artifact, then unless I recognize that entity as an authority, like a regulator or like an expert, I'm not going to confuse that with a statement made by the vendor for that artifact. And so that's, I think that's a minimal interpretation of feed that doesn't require agreeing on what the feed means, but of course is not as useful as everyone agreeing on that they are issuing statements on the same artifact. I think from what John was suggesting, it was more like there is a feed, and for a given feed, there are some issuers that are authorized and others that are not. And that's possible as a registration policy, but I don't think that's what we had in mind when we described the feed in the initial architecture.
Well, it'd be worth revisiting. I don't see necessarily. Okay, that's some reading homework for people. I think the beauty of having it the way you just said is that it could be as useful and as strongly tied to an artifact as I think you said it was originally meant, but it doesn't have to be. I think there's very strong feedback, and with both my chair hat on and off, I think we have to allow mutually distrustful, disagreeing parties to make observations about exactly the same artifact. And clearly they're never going to give access, or their chosen issuers are not going to let them access the same feed. So they need some way of making those observations. So yeah, I'll certainly do a bit of a review of the words there. If other people are interested, I think we need to clear that up. Thanks. But
maybe just following up on that, I think that if we see feeds as a way of subdividing what each issuer is doing, then it becomes completely okay for two issuers that don't trust one another at all to issue both a statement for what happens to be the same by using the same feed for it. But now we can clearly separate access control to the transparency service that may be there for preventing error of service from trust, which is that if I trust one of the party and not the other, then I'm only going to consider the statement from the first party and I will ignore the other. I think that's quite important when as a verifier, if I want to verify a statement, then I think in most cases I will know in my policy which issue and which feed to consider. I don't see many cases where I will know the feed and I will be okay with any issuer I don't know saying something about that feed, because that's putting too much pressure on access control.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, cool. Henk, welcome.
Yeah, sorry. Hi there. I'm recovering in summer. I don't know why. What I'm trying to, a lot of things have been said. So what I'm trying to comment on is, first of all, I think there's wide agreement on a SCITT service shall not be spammed with arbitrary inputs that are just ending on an append-only ledger and therefore clogging it. Okay, I think everybody wants that. That should be a #1 rule, and I have no idea how to achieve that. Why? Because we have this interesting spectrum between issuer, feed, and registration policy. I just heard that, maybe I misheard, but I'm rephrasing it, so please correct me if I'm wrong. That feeds could have separate registration policies. I'm just letting that float there as an assertion. I don't know. What I'm definitely sure about, that different issuers can talk about a feed and a few of them are more like the originator of the feed. They are responsible, have some authority about the artifact, product / topic, and because they're, I don't know, the creator of it, of the software component, for example, and now they state something about it that seems fine. I do not know if the feed is exclusive to the issuer. That feels weird. So what I would assume is that multiple issuers can add to that feed, issuing from a different point of view, so to speak, with their own identity. Now, registration policies could, for example, for the simplest version of avoiding spam, filter, so to speak, by identity. So not everybody may comment on a feed or add to a feed, but only a few issuers. And maybe registration policies to feeds are different per feed. I don't know. So that's an interesting set of lemma here. So it's a trilemma somehow, or maybe a quadrilemma. And so I think we have to kind of mark out what we want to do in the first simple solution here, the minimal viable product we want to produce. And for me, it was always like every issuer, independent of feed, is somehow running through a gatekeeping function. Maybe that is augmented by a feed the issuer wants to add to. I don't know. That's, of course, management overhead. And we just have to have a first decision here, I think. I think that's the most important thing to continue, to have this 3 dimensions of registration policies. Do they apply just to issuer? Do they apply to issuer feed tuple, or even more? I think all of this, again, wants to reduce spam. We do not want to exclude anyone from commenting, but we do want to exclude spam. And that is a conundrum. And I think the minimal viable next step should at least have some solution for that. But then we can go from there, if even it's not perfect. And it's me. Sorry for talking so long.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. Welcome, Roy. Good to see you on Juneteenth.
Good morning, everyone. So I started a thread with Charlie and Ray to try and give some clarity to my thoughts and get their input so we could actually break this up a bit. I haven't heard back from Charlie and Ray yet, so it's in flight, so don't despair.
Right.
When it comes down to the policy that I think we're talking here for ledgers and so forth, it's all about who the identity providers or types of identities that we validate making the bar. If we start talking about product and who can write to things, I think you're getting into more of the product built on top of the building blocks.
Yeah, exactly.
And if we wanted to diverge to that, then there's a different set of policy. I still believe, as I wrote in the chat, there is going to be instances where there's, for OSS or for small businesses, they can't afford to run their own feeds or whatever, and it's going to be too costly or too high of maintenance. Therefore, having things such as clouds or GitHub or Amazon or Microsoft having hosts for these where they sell services or they offer it as a free registry, we'll get into cases where we start talking about RBAC. I think, though, having a model where at an edge of a corporation or organization, you can have your own SCITT instance apply different policy of who can write against a product makes sense. Like your auditors for your company doing legal compliance and so forth will give you the okay that it's meets the bar and is fair to run in here. But that's independent of the identity trust relationship that we're talking about in the ledger portion. So I just want to make sure we're not conflating the two here and go from there.
Yeah, it's a great point. Certainly, it's always very tempting to get above the building blocks. And I think, certainly to my mind, I don't know if anyone would disagree, but to my mind, what you just said sounds exactly right. You have a use case or an application vertical aware layer on top of SCITT, which is picking up artifacts that it can check and trust. but that's not the same as having a full-featured CI/CD system or software supply chain audit system. Cool, Cedric, you're back.
Yes. So I think we agree. I just want to clarify in response to Hank that I think it's critical that we specify enough checks to prevent impersonation and forgery, and that's about verifying the signatures and making sure the identity is well formed and the signature is valid. I think in practice it's important to do whatever we can against spam, but I don't see how we would be able to define spam for every supply chain in the standard. So I think, as I believe Roy is suggesting, it's the responsibility of the transparency service to decide whether to authorize the registration or not of a statement based on the issuer and the feed and the other headers. And in the architecture, we can say that it is the case, and the transparency service should document how it is going to do that, so that it's fair and it does not suppress opinions for some of the more public transparency services. But at the same time, I really don't think we should explain how the transparency service is supposed to do that, because that's a hard problem, and we can support any transparency service with any policy for access control. I think we explicitly decided the access control was implementation specific for that reason. So I just want to check we are all in agreement to explain that it's something important and that it's a responsibility of the transparency service, or if you think we need to be more specific about how to prevent spam.
Yeah, so this is Hank. Quickly coming back to this, sorry. Yeah, I absolutely, this makes it more clear for me. So defining what vehicles or dimensions we provide in the first draft here to be used is our scope. How that is implemented and then enforced is out of scope. So we provide the channels and the dimensions for how to restrict something, but we can't guarantee no spam. We can't also, that's definitely a no-go. We'll not ever check a lying issuer. That is for the system holder to then, or for the participants of this even to determine. But we define a few dimensions how to that can be leveraged to achieve that goal. And I'm absolutely okay with that if I got that right.
Yeah, I think that's a great shout. Because things like impersonation, right? If somebody steals the private key from somewhere that isn't part of the implementation, then is that impersonation or not? Who knows? It's a different thing. So let's not get caught up in that rabbit hole. Ray?
Yeah, let me tell you, I'm really afraid of anything but a pretty strict model. The idea, I mean, it'd be great if we could say just anybody can put things into this like Keytrans is doing, but I think that's just going to become a spam magnet, and it's going to be a mess. Whereas a strict model, meaning that you can only submit stuff to this if you're the actual owner of the product, for example, that gives us the vast majority of the benefits of the system without, and also give us a way to limit who supports it. That can be supported just by a few fields that are exposed in the log that we can match up to, or some other kind of a different type of a log that allows us to keep track of who's authorized. But because some of the things that have been discussed in terms of complaints of the system or maybe bugs of the system, those have been sort of, I thought, put aside as we're not going to be doing the VEX vulnerability. Could be, you could have one of these set up just to track vulnerabilities and bugs of systems, but that's a little bit different than getting the bills of materials and actually like the official statement of here is the product and here's the component of the product, or in my case, here's the election, here's a component of the election, not everyone else saying I don't like the results. So there's a great benefit to sort of a strict model. Now, whether we want to put that into the actual underlying, I don't think it should go into the lower level. I think both models should be supported by the lower level, and then, but I do believe that the only one that will be, actually productive is sort of a strict model. And that doesn't mean you can't run a SCITT log with looser registration. It's just that we need to target the capability of having the strict model. Otherwise, and I think that should be our first focus. That's my opinion. Thanks.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Ray. And that matches the little bit of homework.
Just hang on a second here, John. Ray, did you get my email, or are you going to respond to that so we can make progress there?
Yeah, I did respond.
Okay, I didn't see it.
I'll send it again. I'll send it again.
No, it's probably in my inbox somewhere, and I got to go find it.
Okay. Yeah, I did respond.
Yeah, certainly what I have in mind, Ray, and the way I think it should work, the way my implementation does work, allows both very, very cleanly. So I think we just need to clean up some wording first and then talk about more specific wording. Cedric, and then unless anyone really feels strongly, I'd like to move on to the use case topic.
Yes, thanks. So as I think we said several times, we all agree it's important to prevent spam, but I think doing that is going to be application specific. So in your example, determining who is the owner of an artifact is really not something I want to define in SCITT, although I will encourage people who set up a transparency service on supply chain to decide that for their supply chain, what it means. The second comment I wanted to make is that I don't think there is too much damage from spam. So who will be affected by this kind of spam? So if someone is spamming statements about some artifacts, and I don't trust or I don't know that person, then I don't care. I'm never going to accept those or even consider those statements as relevant for me. So I think the main problem with spam is going to be the workload of the transparency service itself. And in that sense, I think the transparency service should be able to decide how to avoid it by having properly strict or restrictive access control policies. But that's really an implementation or application specific issue, not something we should strictly require because it's too hard to define in general.
Yeah, certainly makes sense to me. Thank you. Good. Okay, so a little bit of progress there, I think, in terms of two very concrete things that we can move forward with, in addition to picking up the thread on the email. Clarifying the scope of a feed sounds like it would be fruitful, because I think we get an awful lot of this stuff done if we just have a common idea of what the objects are that we're dealing with. And as Henk suggested, and as we suggested last week, indeed, we needed to have those minimum requirements for what outcome we're trying to aim for and what people can rely on. But let's not get too deep into the mechanisms. So that all sounds good to me. Cool, thank you. So I wanted to move on to well, not quite use cases, the 117 hackathon in particular, but again, for those who weren't here earlier, we agreed a few weeks ago that the 117 hackathon was going to be around interoperable registration policies, because it was a difficult area of the spec. I don't feel at this stage that we have made enough progress to do that. And there have been a couple of suggestions of use cases to test out the usefulness of SCITT that we might be able to rally around. So with that in mind, I'd like to give Dick the floor for a moment to discuss an idea he's had, and then have a bit of a discussion about whether we adopt that, whether we do things alongside it, or whether we think we can still do the sort of more spec technical one.
Okay, well, thank you, Hannes. I'm going to share my screen at this point. So let me go ahead and do that. I'm just going to share the entire screen because I've got a bunch of stuff I want to show you today. Okay. Wow, that looks ugly, huh? So let me start by showing you what I'm going to talk about today. Do you see the FDA medical device cybersecurity presentation?
Yes, we do, Dick.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's to me
thanks, guys.
visible. Yes.
Okay, so Hannes reached out and asked me if I was aware of any real practical use cases that we might want to consider for the hackathon. And so the one that came to mind is what's happening here in the U.S. Starting October 1st, there are enforcement rules requiring medical device manufacturers to provide SBOMs and other materials. So let me show you the materials that FDA is going to be requesting. Do you guys see slide 8? Should be on your screen now. So I'm assuming you guys are
Yes,
seeing
we
slide
do.
8. Okay,
We see
thanks.
it.
So you see the recommendations right there, right in the center of the slide, are to provide SBOMs to FDA and to provide SBOMs to users. But they also have additional requirements with regard to these elements that need to be submitted by medical device manufacturers. For example, known vulnerability information, they want to know support status, and they want to know end of life and basically commercial status. So I went ahead and took this information from FDA that was presented on June 1st to NIST and MITRE, and I formulated a use case around it. And just so you know, this is really happening. I also want to share with you the other material. Let me get that up for you. You guys see the Federal Register now?
Yes.
Okay. So this was actually published. In fact, let me do it the easy way. I'm going to bring it up this way. I'm going to bring it up. This
Dick, are you going to
document
share this slide, Dick, when you're done?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that, Roy?
Are you going to share the slide deck when you're done?
Yeah, you guys can have it all. I think I already sent it out to the list, actually.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So here you can see that this is fairly fresh stuff. This was issued June 14th through a Federal Register notification. But basically, this is the document that tells the device manufacturers they need to submit those materials. So now I want to show you what I actually prepared. So do you guys see my use case on the screen, the Word document?
Yes.
Okay. So at the top, I go through all of the justification, the information about the FDA requirements. And basically what they're looking for is really highlighted right here. Those are the items that they're requesting the device manufacturers to submit. So they're looking for a plan to monitor and identify vulnerabilities and exploits and so forth. They want to see that suppliers are following specific processes and procedures to ensure a reasonable assurance that the device is secure. And one of the items there is also a software bill of materials. So you can see there's a few items that FDA is requesting from the medical device manufacturer. And I thought, well, this could be a good potential use case to consider for the hackathon. And so I went ahead and prepared this. Again, this is in response to a Hannes requested. So here's the description of what I proposed. So the purpose is to provide FDA personnel with the location information for these, what they call 524 data element requirements, which I just showed you, and which are on that slide 8 as well. And so what I had recommended is basically to develop or demonstrate the use of what we call a vendor response file that contains all the information about where the SBOM is located, what type of SBOM, information on vulnerability disclosure, and so on and so forth. And so the use case would basically provide all of those items, and here's the information here. All of that information would be provided in this one document called the vendor response file. And so I'll just go ahead and show you what a vendor response file actually looks like. So you can get a look at that. Can you see what the vendor response file on the screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So here you'll notice there's essentially some data about the party that's submitting the information. So this would be a medical device manufacturer. This is actually a production document that REA issues for our own products. And so what you'll see here is there's the vendor who's supplying all the information, and then there's the details about the individual products. And so the way this would work is a medical device manufacturer would list out all of the software products that they have in their device. And so there'd be one of these entries per product. Do you see the highlighting there, guys?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. So the medical device manufacturer would identify the licensor of the software they're supplying, the product name of the software, and the version of the software. They'd also have to identify the location of the SBOM. And this is kept in a secure location because it is sensitive material. So the only information that would actually be provided to the SCITT registry would be the location. The actual SBOM itself would remain under access control. But you see it contains different characteristics about describing the SBOM, like what type it is, what version, and the format of the document, and the digital signature that goes with it. There's also the location of where the software was obtained from, some information about whether or not it has vulnerabilities. It also, in this case right here, it lists the actual vulnerability disclosure report that the medical device manufacturer has created. And this follows the NIST VDR format. And then following down below, you see there's additional information that's also been requested. So the SDLC policy URL describes the processes that were used in the SDLC, or the development of the product. The evidence URL, in this case, we talk about the use of the self-attestation from CISA, which is still undergoing development. And then we have the two statuses that have been requested, the commercial status and the support status. And again, that goes back to this material. So going back to the recommendations that were provided by the FDA, all of those materials would be placed into a single vendor response file. And so going back to the proposed use case, here are the steps that would occur. So the registration of a vendor response file within a SCITT transparency service with an appropriate registration policy specifying the FDA response file. And that would be stored, that would be placed into a SCITT registry by an authorized party. So the medical device manufacturer is assumed to be the issuer of this information. Once it's been registered in the registry, the service will provide a receipt indicating that the VRF is indeed registered, and it will provide a URL to that. And now the MDM can make that material available to the FDA by providing the link to the registered VRF within the SCITT registry. And of course, the FDA goes ahead and retrieves the VRF, which lists all of the information about the SBOM and other documentation. And then they're able to download the VRF and all the materials in it based on the data elements shown there. And then they go on with their processing. So the point here is that a a genuine use case for this could be the filing of a vendor response file into a SCITT registry that is digitally signed, that the payload is digitally signed, the VRF is digitally signed, and it identifies the documents that FDA would be requiring from device manufacturers, and all that material can be downloaded by the FDA based on the contents of the vendor response file. So in summary, what I'm suggesting here is that this FDA use case could potentially be used as a use case for the IETF hackathon, if indeed the group agrees that this is a viable use case. Thanks.
Yeah, fabulous. Thank you, Dick. I could get on board with that. But Ray and Neil are in the queue. So Ray.
Okay, quick question about this. That JSON block that you were showing me, that whole object is what you're thinking. That's the VRF that you would be submitting. Is that right, Dick?
Yeah, that's correct, Ray. I put it back on the screen because what's going to happen here, the vendor would be a medical device manufacturer in this case, right? And there's some identifiers and contact information. That's all part of what's required for these FDA submittals. But then, a single device could have multiple software products in it. So you'd have to list each one along with the SBOM and other information. But this payload that I have on the screen is what's submitted to the SCITT registry.
Okay, as the payload of the submission, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay, and then in your concept of this, there is a URL that's available later to access it within the registry. I'm wondering if that's actually something that we're supporting right now, and how it's set up. I know there was talk about DIDs and other things. I don't know if that's actually, maybe somebody else can answer that. If that's actually something that's supported, or is it just say it's in the registry? I want to make a final comment, and that is, the key trans thing has a whole secondary sort of structure to make it easy to search for stuff within the log. And we may need the same kind of thing, because in order to find this, like if you don't happen to have the URL, we need people to be able to say, gee, I want to find out about, and what would they have, Dick? What would be is there a name of this product or something within this use case that would be the normal thing that would be specified, other than the URL?
So just answer your question, Ray. The way I've scoped it out here, and it's not the only way to do it, obviously, but the way I scoped it here is that when that device manufacturer submits this into the SCITT registry, they receive a URL that can be given to the FDA to pull down that vendor response file. So this is just as the proposed use case, but you make a very reasonable point that this thing should be searchable. And so, you may want to use information, from the actual VRF itself to make this information searchable. Like, I want to see all of the filings by Reliable Energy Analytics, let's say in this case, or Dick Brooks, the contact person in this case. So it's conceivable that support for search is entirely a reasonable expectation, I believe.
So what they're doing here is they're listing for vendor legal name, Reliable Engineer. No, go back to the other one.
Oh, sorry. Let me go back.
Yeah, because that's what I want to take a look at what they're submitting, because it seems like, and then within that, they have what looks like a number of products listed there. Product name, SAG-PM trademark, TM.
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
So that first thing there is the product name. Now, in my mind, I was conceptualizing that each one of these products would be separately submitted as a product, such that that, you know, it could be separately accessed, but you're doing here is proposing. Now, is this the standard way to do this where a number of products are listed at the same time?
I wouldn't say it's standard. This is an open source artifact that REA created a couple of years ago to support our own use cases, our own customers. And we found that they would be needing to submit this information to, in our case, you know, end user customers, who would then retrieve the information and store the evidence data. And this is the evidence data, of course, all this stuff here.
Okay, so that would mean that we would need to have sort of like a list of products that are applicable, that are you know, discussed in the submission. All right. Okay. Well, thanks. Those are my questions. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks, Ray. Any others?
So I guess this is Neil, and so I'm delighted to have a use case to dig into. So from what I understand, Dick, the FDA is requiring certain disclosures from a vendor and perhaps other recognized parties. And I'm willing to assume that the vendor, via the stuff that you're talking about, has met all current U.S. government requirements, that it includes stuff that maybe they wish wasn't true, you know, vulnerabilities or whatever, but that they're fulfilling the letter of the law. And what I'm wondering about is for relying parties who not only care about those disclosures, but also are maybe currently outside the mainstream. Maybe they're worried about emerging diseases or risks that other people aren't yet worried about, might never be worried about, might be worried about, you know, if there's a disease that in the future will be recognized in something that the FDA is going to care about. Or a relying party may care about ecological impacts or whatever. So something that is not in the letter of the law currently, but that relying parties care about. And I'm going to imagine that there are other issuers that are happy to comment on such topics. So how does a relying party learn not only what is required by the FDA, but also what other people who they are interested in say about a specific product? How does the relying party discover a feed if we're going to have multiple feeds in a SCITT instance? Or how do they discover the SCITT instances that are going to actually delve into this area that they care about? You know, I can imagine this being all an open-ended world, that there could be an enormous amount of stuff to kind of wade through, and people are going to disagree about identifiers and stuff like that. So how does a relying party get everything that they care about without being spammed by having to look through too much stuff?
No, that's a great question. Let me try and answer that for you. So there's also vendor level information. So in addition to having the product level information, there's also vendor level information. So for example, in these documents or these URLs, there are policy documents. And so in here, you would have things like information about, you know, your education of your personnel for cybersecurity. You would basically put all the information within those policy documents. And so here, the cybersecurity policy would talk about all those things this vendor does in order to ensure that the environment is safe. So this is bigger than the SSDF that NIST talks about. This is other practices that go into play, that, you know, things like data protection that they may have in place for personal information. There's also financial data, so they can make available financial data for the vendor, and also other company data. This is the catch-all that says, okay, if I'm a software vendor, I would tell you in my company data all the locations where software development is performed. So I've got a site in, you know, in Iran, I've got a site in India, I've got a site in Turkey, and I've got a site in China. And all of that information, let's say, would be listed in here. And that becomes part of the risk assessment as well, because, you know, foreign influence is a concern. hopefully that answers your question. So there's vendor level data, and then there's product level data. And this is where we get down into things like, the practices that are actually followed to produce the product.
Yeah, but my guess is that there will be so they might, so suppose, I don't know, I have to come up with an example where the company doesn't believe in this emerging theory, doesn't think it's an issue, knows that it's embarrassing, doesn't want to have anything to do with it, doesn't want to disclose things. And other people say, well, it's very straightforward. The company claims that it has so-and-so, and that means that it's going to be a disaster for the environment or whatever. How do I, who only, I'll try to be concrete. So suppose that it, enhances some fringe environmental thing, which again, I'm not trying to, relying parties are going to want to be able to tie together, mash up company data with other data and make that easy for people to find. And this may over time actually be incorporated into the law, where it's like, well, now everybody realizes that smoking is bad for you, and we have to reassess all the stuff that we've been told about risks and so on. What about the stuff that is not part of anything that is officially government required that I know that you've got so much experience with?
The only thing I could say there is, we tried to be as generic as possible, and we use this VRF primarily within the energy industry. That's where most of our work takes place. So it works over there. It looks like it would work in the case of the FDA use case here. So we think it's generic enough, but to be very candid with you, we would be happy to pass on this VRF concept, this open source concept, to another entity, and if that's the IETF-SCITT, then we'd be okay with that. We have no personal desire to be, supporting the open source components here, but we will until we can find a consensus body to do so. So, and that's when you could try to expand it to be more all-encompassing.
Thanks for that offer, Dick. I think maybe we could make a generic VRF the output of the hackathon. That would be quite exciting.
John, I'm all on board for that.
Great. Okay. Well, let's sync up afterwards. That should be quite easy, because I'm inclined to agree. I've got experience from the ESG side and the nuclear side as well. We've found similar flexibility is actually quite easy, as long as we maintain that respect for the boundaries between the SCITT layer and the application layer. So yeah, hopefully.
And just to follow on that, John, I just want to mention there is an XML schema that goes with this VRF, so I'd be happy to contribute that as well.
Excellent.
Again, I'll just note that it's not that doesn't quite respond to the question of how do you find something that a particular issuer of the feed is not actually interested in sharing. So.
For sure. Yeah, no, the point is extremely valid now. It's just a matter of how do we eat the elephant one bite at a time, I think was the essence of my response there. Roy, you have the pleasure of closing us out, I believe.
Sure. So normally we've been relying on other committees or other working groups to define documents for the various verticals. Like SBOMs are defined outside of your VEX the same way going forward. If we want to make a hackathon where we try and use our building blocks to solve a real problem, I have no problem with that. But is there no other group driving this discussion, Dick?
I know there are other discussions underway. Roy, there's been a lot of talk. Of course, the NIST meeting that occurred on June 1st had a lot of discussion about this. The material I presented from FDA was actually presented at the NIST meeting. I can provide you a link to the topics that were discussed at the NIST meeting if you think that would help.
So the question becomes, if we want to take this on as a hackathon, do we invite somebody from the Uber group to join us? That's fine. I have no problem with doing that. last thing I want to say is I don't think I'm going to generate an SBOM for Windows 95, and I still see it showing up on a lot of medical equipment these days. It scared the crap out of me.
I don't blame you.
Well, at least it's not soup, Roy.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. But yeah, this will change. I have to go look at this document. This changes some of the goals for short term for what critical software is. If FDA is driving this independently, it may increase the scope of what all has to have SBOM really quickly. But in that regard, just be aware that this discussion kind of supersedes what the working group is currently tasked with. If we want to use a hackathon as an example of trying to use our own tools, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I would just with my full chair hat on and my vendor hat on. I seem to wear two hats a lot these days. But that was sort of what I intended, right? Prove that the building blocks work, and the flexible schema would simply be proving that the flexible schema is supported. I don't want another working group output.
Yeah. And as I said, gentlemen, I'm happy to pass this over to the IETF-SCITT, this VRF. That would not be an issue for us. We're happy to do it. We don't have any IPR over that other than, you know, it's a CC by 4.0. So it's available for anyone to use.
Brilliant. Thank you. Cool. Okay. Well, we're a few minutes over. Thank you all for persevering. But that was great. I'll echo also Neil's comment from earlier that it's great to actually see a use case put forward to dance around. I think that's really helpful. So certainly I've got a bit of homework to do, and hopefully a couple of others of you will do that too, and we'll meet in GitHub for the week, and I'll see you next week.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, John, one last point. FDA is planning to have a meeting with us. You'll be included in that as well as Hannes.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. Yeah. I saw that.
Roy, give me a call. Check your email and give me a call.
Yeah, I saw it. I think I'm busy for 3/4 of the day, but I'll reach out to you.
Okay.
Dick, if you want somebody else to show up, let me know, and I'll see if I can find at least 1 or 2 parties that are interested in attending the FDA stuff.
That sounds great, Roy. And I have reached out to Honeywell already. Deanna is looking inside Honeywell to see if anyone would like to play the role with MBM on this.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.